Everybody, it's great to be back here again. Tomorrow it's Friday, Parashat Vayakhel and Parashat Shkalim. It's a special reading, as we all know. And I want to open the portion up with something we know, which happens all over the world. I mean, if you go to any country, they have their sports that are national sports. And if you go to those games, you're going to see in the United States baseball and football, Super Sunday. But when you're looking in the audience in the stadium, you see how the fans go wild and they're shaking and screaming and cheering, and there's something like they go into some kind of ecstasy of watching these games that go on. We're in any country, of course, or it's a famous singer. They're going to be jumping and screaming for this singer that is on stage and all that. Well, it's interesting. What does the fans, what do the people that go to these games and concerts, what are they looking for, really? In reality, what kind of experience are they looking for? And that's a very important question. And the reason I opened up with that is because, there's always there are two sides to everything. We have to be very careful before. A lot of people can be very critical before they understand the depth, the deep meaning behind certain things. Now, I'm not here trying to promote going to ball games, and all that, but I'm just trying to say there's something that the world is looking for, that they're attracted to those things. And that thing, we have to understand what that is. Now, I'm going to get back to this. So if we look into the portions of the week that we've been reading for the last couple of weeks, we've been focusing on the tabernacle, right? The tabernacle, it seems also redundant. It's like literally repetitive. The last two portions we're going to read, this one and next week, but days next week, they talk all about things that were already mentioned in the first two portions, Tuma and Titzaveh, about the Mishkan. So the question is, why is there so many details here? And if we look very carefully within what we're reading in the Torah, we're reading about beauty. We're reading about aesthetics. We're reading about gold and silver and ornaments, all kinds of things that went into building the temple. And that was really very fascinating, is that things that seem so physical, things that seem so really low, the most physical things you can talk about, happen to be pointed out in great detail by the Torah. There's something obviously great message that the Torah is giving us over here. And in order to understand this, if we look at the world, and as a modern world today, and we look back over the generations, way back in times, in the temple times, during pre-temple times, we saw that there was tremendous desire for idol worship. And the Torah talks about a lot of stones and bowing down to stones and bowing down to to things made out of wood and all that. And we have in our modern generation, people have the Buddha and all that stuff, but still, it's something that a human being who has sense, in his normal senses, right away we say, look, how could they do something so stupid? It doesn't have any, it's something that we can't understand. How can they bow down to a stone and to to a piece of wood? These idols. And in reality, that's a wrong way of looking at it, because if we look in the detail of that, there is a human being has these tremendous powers as a human being that God gave us. And all these physical powers, in reality, we want to be able to take those physical powers that we have and our physical desires and all that, we want to be able to elevate them. We want to be able to combine them, in our lives and as we say, in our divine service. And that's important to understand. But the problem, of course, comes when there's a lack of balance and mistakes are made, tremendous mistakes are made. And, idol worship, the Maimonides, in his special book called Mishneh Torah, he goes through a description. He describes how the evolution of idol worship. And he talks about how in reality, the world realizes the creator of the world, but they wanted to give honor to the things that he created, like things that honor God, like the stars, the hosts of the heavens. So they thought it would be the proper thing would be to create temples and honoring the stars and all this, but they didn't give up their faith in God, but they had another, they had a reason, human logical reason for why they wanted to create this worship of the stars, etc. And eventually it led to the total forgetting of God and focusing on the worship of images. And they were led by false prophets, all that whole thing. It was a gradual digression. And it turned into, what they did is they take their powers and their, and of the forces of life, of eating and drinking and their sexual desires and going to the bathroom. They turned all those things, these human faculties of human being, the physical side, and they turned that into idol worship. And as we see idol worship in those different areas, as we all know, for example, Molech, murder, throwing children through the fire, or Baal Pa'or, which was actually, they would go to the bathroom in front of these idols, terrible. It would reach the lowest levels, of their human kohot, the human powers that they did, the human elements. And that's really where idol worship eventually made its way to. And on the other hand, in Judaism, we do not negate the physical, the pleasures of the world, and to uplift the physical pleasures of the world. When we eat something, we're making a blessing, we want to, of course, uplift it all. So we have to see how that fits in with our Judaism. And Rav Kook talks about something very beautiful, the beautiful harmony that existed between the divine, what he calls the divine idea, and we've spoken about this, and the national idea. There's a harmony here. And the divine idea is to come to show us that the godliness of the created universe comes down to every level in our lives and our nation, and we can uplift all those different faculties of our nation through godliness. And that's really the beauty of the nation of Israel, which actually combines both those worlds in a perfect harmony. That's the goal, to do that in that perfect harmony. But the problem is when we lose that harmony, and then we fall into, God forbid, idol worship and other things. Now, looking again at the temple, and this is exactly what I was trying to explain before, is that the temple, with all its beautiful aesthetics and all that, there was something additional. What was that for? That was for the service of bringing sacrifice. And an animal sacrifice, bringing offerings to God in the temple itself, it seems something that's extremely, on one hand, very, very, chomri, very physical. But there, it's like the physical world and the spiritual world are coming to the complete unification. And that's really what happens in the temple. So we're taking all these different fine metals and different ornaments and items when we're building the beautiful temple. And then within it, we are actually uplifting the animate, the inanimate, the plant life. All that's being uplifted and unified in worship of Hashem in the temple itself. And there the balance was perfect. But when the balance is lost, then it becomes what we see in those different forms of idol worship, etc. So these forces of life are very positive things, and we don't want to lose those forces of life. We want to uplift the forces of life. And that's really the great lesson that we must realize when we approach, when we're approaching properly Torah Judaism, that we don't want to turn to some kind of, monks or people go into these caves and just forget about the beauty of life, but we want to uplift the beauty of life, and we want to make it unified with the divine. And that's really a big difference of Judaism and other religions in the world, and that's an important thing to stress. Now, I want to show one example of this concept, try to show one example of this concept from the portion. So if we look in the portion, we see regarding, let me just quickly bring it up. We learned about it's called the Marot HaTzovot, the copper mirrors that were brought for the building of the kior. The kior is the wash basin in the temple. And I'd like to just bring down quickly the verse itself, where it brings it down. If we look in Exodus, our portion, chapter 38, it says like this. It says, Vayas et kior nechoshet, verse 8, it says, they made the kior, right? The kior is the wash basin out of copper. B'marot hatzavot, with the mirrors, it's called hatzavot. Literally, what does tzavot mean? Tzavot the word comes like an army, comes from tzava. What does that mean? It means from the mirrors of progeny. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Asher tzavu petach ol moed, right? Which they came around the entrance to the ol moed. What is this all about? And Rashi, and I want to focus on Rashi here. Rashi says like this, something really fascinating, Rashi, which really connects to the concept we brought down. Rashi says, B'marot hatzovot, Benot Yisrael hayu biyadan marot. The daughters of Israel had these mirrors. So the copper here were copper mirrors, very, very unusual. It wasn't the regular form of copper, but it was copper that was very shiny. And Rashi says, Shero'ot behem kishehem mitkashtot. They were able to literally, when they went to put on makeup and get dressed, they would look at these mirrors, right, to get dressed, to get all, what's the word, when you're putting your makeup on and all that. Ve'af otan lo igvu melavi l'nedvat mishkan. But those same mirrors that the women used when they made themselves up to make themselves pretty, they took that and they wanted to give it to the divine service, and they didn't hold it back. Vaya mo'es Moshe ben Moshe Rabbeinu, the prophet of Israel, he was turned off from this. He didn't want them to bring these mirrors. Why? Because seemingly they're made for the purpose of the evil urge. They want to make themselves pretty, these are very physical things and all that. Moshe Rabbeinu felt that this wasn't the proper way of divine service, to bring these things for the building of the kiol, of the wash basin. Amalo Kadosh Baruch Hu, but God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, he says to him, I want you to receive these special mirrors from the women. Why? Ki elu chavivim alai min hakol, because these are the most special things in my eyes. And it goes on to Rashi goes on to bring down the Midrash. What does it say? It says, she'al yidehem he'emidu hanashim tzovot rabot b'mitzrayim. It goes through this. The women of Israel, they set up tzvaot rabot. Tzvaot means armies. They set up great armies in Egypt. Kishayu ba'alehem yigeim ba'avodat parech. When their husbands came back from the slavery and they were broken from the work in the fields with the Egyptians, over them. So they would come and they would bring the husbands food and drink. And they would take the mirrors in front of the husbands. And everyone would see her husband together with her. And then she would sort of, in this way, she would get close to her husband. Lomar, I'm pretty than you are. It was something, they was having some kind of lovey-dovey here, getting closer through that. And from this whole thing, and this brings them to have children together, and they would have children. So what's really fascinating is that these mirrors were something that it would bring the closest between husband and wife, and they would have their children. And Rashi goes on to bring down the verse from the Song of Songs, Tachat atapuach oraticha, I have awakened you under the apple tree, which is referring to this. V'nasa kiyomim, and this is where the kiol, the wash basin, was made. And Rashi goes on to say that this shehu lasum shalom beit ish lishto, brings peace between man and wife. Lashkot b'mayim shebetochot shekinala ba'ala b'nistera. Also, we learn about the sotah, that they took the water and they put in God's name in the water. If there was a what's it called, when the husband felt his wife wasn't being loyal to him and all that, we all are familiar with that story. So it really brought the peace through the water, that when she turned out that she was, she's a loyal woman, etc. So that whole kior represents this physical relationship of the love of a husband and wife. Not only on the spiritual side between the husband and wife, but also on the physical, that physical connection they have. And that was the most, in the words of Rashi, it's amazing. God says that is the chavivim alai ma'akol. It's the most wanted thing, and the most dear thing for me than everything, to bring those mirrors to be part of the temple for the kiol, which was really fascinating. And this concept, what Rashi teaches us, is so clear that we'll learn from here, that we don't want to be monks in some kind of cave, but the idea is to take the physical pleasure of life, the physical elements of life, and uplift them for the divine. So what the women do, they gave these mirrors. They became so holy, they were part of the kiyol in the temple. Can you imagine? Part of the temple, which was fascinating. And that connects, of course, to everything we say. And I want to bring a couple of other examples here, which is really, to go up in one notch of depth over here. The Baal HaTurim, one of the great commentaries on the Bible and the Torah, he brings down about the word. It says marot sovot, right? Marot sovot are literally the mirrors of the tzovot, right? Of the armies that came out. Again, this is a midrash interpretation, of course, but that's what we're talking about, this deep understanding. So he says the word b'marot is mentioned in different times. The Bible brings down the Mitzvah. It's mentioned 4 times. And we see it here b'marot tzovot, and we also see it with Jacob, with the vision of the ladders. We all know what is it for Jacob. It says Vayomer Elokim Lisa, God said to Jacob, b'marot halayla, in the visions of the night, right? And Parashat Vayigash. So that happened later than the vision of the ladder, but whatever it is, God said, b'marot halayla, in the visions of the night to Jacob, and Jacob said he's here. So it was basically, it's a sign of prophecy. B'marot is not only, it could be a mirror, but could also be a sign of vision, prophecy. We see the same thing in 2 other times in Yecheskel, the prophet Ezekiel, where it says, relating to the temple itself, which is fascinating, B'marot Elohim havi'ani el Eretz Yisrael, in Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 2 and 4. It's also mentioned in Ezekiel, it says over there, God brought him into the temple, right, which is, we know chapter 40 of Ezekiel is all about the building of the 3rd temple, where it mentions as well, B'marot Elohim, that same word, talking about the visions of God, and that connects to here, Ma'ot, of the women, the mirrors. Also, if we see the next verse, by the way, it talks about, it says, Vayavei oti shama, God brought Ezekiel to Jerusalem, to the temple, and it says, V'nei ish mar'eu ki mar'e nechoshet. And it says like a vision of copper, which is interesting. It's a copper mirrors. It's another connection here into what we're talking about. And also, we go back previously in the book of Ezekiel in chapter 8. Also, he was brought to the temple. Of course, this is in vision and prophecy the same way in all situations that we're talking about here. It says to Vayishlach tavnit yad, like some kind of form of a hand came and it took him by his head and brought him, to Israel, brought him to Israel, to Jerusalem, etc. So these we see the connection of the temple, again, because he's brought both times Ezekiel to the temple, connected to that same word usage, because in English you don't see that, but when you're looking in Hebrew, you see that same exact word usage, which is fascinating. So we see the connection of the temple, but this comes together with another time the word tzovot, not marot, but the word tzovot, the same exact word that's used regarding the mirrors. And that appears in the book of Samuel. And there it's a very sad story. And then we're talking about the fact that in Samuel number 1, chapter 2, right away in the beginning of the book, we're talking about Eli HaKohen. And Eli HaKohen has 2 sons, as we all know, Hofni and Phinehas. And these sons are not walking with God. And what they're doing is they're in the temple, and instead of using the temple to uplift all the physical things we spoke about, but what do? They're more interested in only the physical things, and they when they're hitting on the knocking with the fork and they're trying to grab out with a fork meat, and they're telling the people that come, give me meat and all that, I'll eat it raw and all these kind of things. They're literally this vulgar behavior on the children of Eli HaKohen. And as later on, Eli talks to him and goes, I hear terrible things about you, what you're doing, it's not a good thing what you're doing. And then it says in again, chapter 2, verse number 22, and here's the word used, the same word, but the mirrors that were donated by the women for the temple. And here, it's the exact opposite. And what does it say over here? It says, Eli HaKohen zaken ma'od, he's very old, and he heard what his children were doing. That they would lie with the women that are waiting. Sovot could also, of course, mean literally to wait by the Petach Ohel Moed, the entrance to the Ohel Moed, the same exact usage of the verse in our portion, the simple understanding of the verse. Hatzovot, that are waiting. Tzovot can also mean to wait. And here, what do we learn about? Is that they not only committed the terrible atrocities of disgracing the temple by eating before they even brought the fats, offered the fats, and it was just a vulgar way of behavior, of just that eating desires. But not only that, here, the sexual desires, that, according to the simple understanding, they actually committed sexual offenses with the women that were waiting. And Rashi brings down that. He also brings down the Midrashic interpretation. The fact that he made them wait was as if, until they were able to get home to their husbands. So it was as if they committed those terrible offenses. But whatever it was, we see a very, very, such a just position of this whole thing, the other side of the picture. Instead of having the temple be a source of inspiration, of taking the physical side of life and uplifting it, into the higher levels, it can actually also draw us down. And that is exactly what the idol worship is all about. The idol worship went to that one side, and they totally forgot about the spiritual side, and they turned, and that's really the downfall, and how people fall into the really bad side of life when they take all their physical world and they bring it down in the direction of idol worship. Now, all these concepts we're talking about is a very, very important concept in life, because the natural thing, people a lot of times when they become, they try to serve God and they want to, be orthodox and do the proper serving. So sometimes they're afraid of their shadow and all that. But God wants us to be able to, the opposite, to live and to be full of life, but not to, God forbid, focus only on that physical side and turn that into that everything, but to uplift all our physical side into the spiritual. So we have to combine both. But on the other hand, not to turn into these monks and not to turn into these people that are, through fast and deprivation and all these kind of things, and then people will bring the opposite. It's like sadness in their lives. Person has to live and enjoy life, but to combine it with the divine worship. That's really the whole lesson here that's coming out of this. Now, we can actually take this and connect it to the other portion. I said we're reading two things this week's portion. We're reading not only about the temple, about building the tabernacle, but we're also reading about the machzit shekel, the half a shekel that was brought for the purpose of the temple. Now, here it's really interesting. The temple year began in Nisan, the month of Nisan. So this Shabbat we're going to be reading a portion called Shkalim as well, which was the beginning in the Rosh Chodesh Adar. It says in the Mishnah they would announce the bringing of the chetzi shekel, the half a shekel, and this way by the month of Nisan, when they begin the new temple year, they already have the money from that was used to purchase the offerings in the temple. So that was the whole mitzvah. Today, unfortunately, we don't have our temple yet, so we have to suffice with reading about it and remembering the mitzvah. And we also have we all know on Erev Purim, on Purim we always have we go on Mincha time, we usually bring the machzit shekel for tzedakah, to zechel machzit shekel, the remembering of the half of shekel that was brought. Now, another deep thing we learn out from this, from the half a shekel, it's hints to the temple. How is that connected to the temple? Well, I'll remind you. King David, as we all know, made a great mistake when he issued an order to his officer, to his general Yoav, to count Israel. And instead of counting Israel, now how do we count? In Judaism, we count something. We don't count people because that brings a evil eye and that can cause damage. But we have to count. We say it's not a good thing to count things directly because that brings again the blessing is something that is samui min ayin, hidden from the eye. But King David went ahead. And the Torah reveals to us that this was his Yetzer Hara, you can call it, that brought him into this wanting to make a census counting for Israel. And as a result, we all know that caused a great plague, because the prophet Gad HaNavi, he went to King David, and of course he said, you can choose, what do you choose? And King David chose the plague, because he said it's better to fall in the hands of God than fall into man, because there was different options, but they would have caused more damage in Israel. So he took the less of the evils, which was the plague. But when the plague was stopped, how was it stopped? We all know through the purchasing of the threshing floor for the temple. So again, so that we see that the counting, doing this physical counting that wasn't properly done, but it stopped when we took the threshing floor. What is the threshing floor? That we purchased a place that's used to thresh wheat from a man named Aravna, or there's a couple of different two names mentioned in the Torah, in the Tanakh. One is called Aravna, which is brought down in the book of Samuel. It's later mentioned in Divrei Hayamim, Al-Nan. But it's really fascinating that King David, when he made this mistake, back in the counting, but what Abel was able to stop the plague was actually the purchase of the threshing floor, the goad, as we say, where wheat was brought and beat down over there, and revealing the inner kernels of the wheat, which is really, Israel is likened to wheat. It says Israel is considered the wheat. This is one of the definitions that Jeremiah brings down regarding Israel. Now, what was the whole thing of this man Aravna? Who was he? He was different opinion. The Torah actually says in the Tanakh that he was a Yevusi. There are other opinions that he was from a Plishti, but he was from the place of Yevusi. And he became a Ger. He became like a Ger Toshav. He was doing the 7 laws of the Noachai laws, but whatever it was, his name, Aravna, right, comes from that actual letters of light, like Aron, like a light. So we're seeing over here, which is really fascinating. I thought that, the concept of where David Melech fell down by counting, trying to count again the people of Israel and not doing the proper way that was supposed to be done. So that would, whatever, I'm not going to go into details now on this particular thing. It's an additional reading and lesson upon itself. But what came out of it at the end, be able to the rectification that came out of it, was the site of the temple, uplifting the most mundane thing, a threshing floor, right? That threshing floor became the place of where our final temple would be rested. Don't forget, until now, we were still in tabernacles, and we were still temporary structures. But this everlasting place, the place where Yitzchak, where Abraham offered his son Isaac, that Mesiut Nefesh, right, to Hashem, right over here, and that temple became the most, of course, holiest place forever of Israel, the place of where the first man was created. That became the site of our temple. And here, our temple, which again we spoke before, is a perfect unification of the physical world, right? That simple threshing floor with the spiritual world. A threshing floor you do on the ground, you're beating something on the ground, but we want to take that ground and uplift it all the way to the heavens. And that's the ladder of Jacob. That is our lives as living a proper life of Torah Judaism, of combining those beautiful worlds of the lower world to the upper world. And that's all about our temple, and it's all about King David, of course, who represents, the end of days, when from his seed we will come the King of Israel that will lead all of Israel into that stage where we rectify all our follies and be able to do a perfect unification of the spiritual and the physical in this world. And that would be a beautiful rectification of the entire universe. The entire world will be uplifted through this. Right now, as we live in a time in Israel, which is a very difficult time with the wars going on and the whole world coming against Israel, is because they don't see, again, they're not seeing yet the spiritual side of how we're going to uplift this whole world and what's going to come out of all this. And right now we're just dealing with the evil forces and they're coming against us in the name of humanity. Israel knows to be more humane than anyone. They don't have to teach us what it is to be humane. And we have to therefore eventually unfold our inner strength as a nation of Israel, be a light to the nations, and we'll see as we rebuild our temple, when all these things will come into place and they'll fall into place. Right now we're heading in this direction. People have to be blind not to see it. Things may get worse, and they probably will before they get better, but they will get very good. And we have to hang on, be strong, and we will, God willing, merit in redemption soon. Shabbat Shalom, B'sorot Tovot, Yeshuot V'nechamot.